Hello and welcome. In this sixth part of our 8-part series about the 7 Hermetic Principles, we are going to look at the 5th principle of rhythm. Closely related to the 4th principles of vibration and polarity, the basis of this principle is that everything moves. Nothing rests. Life isn't still, and neither are we. Whether we notice it or not, everything in our experience is subject to a hidden pulse. That pulse is what the Hermetic teachings call the principle of rhythm. And it's not just about waves in the ocean or the ticking of a clock. It's about the rise and fall of emotions, the ups and downs of energy, the forward and backward motion of our thoughts, our moods, our growth, even our sense of purpose. When we begin to understand this principle as an actual law, we begin to reclaim a subtle kind of power. Because while we can't stop the rhythm, we can learn to work with it. First, we need to understand what it means that this principle is a law. It means that, properly understood, it works predictably in an exact manner. It also means that it is a pattern for how reality works. If you observe your experiences through the lens of this principle, just like with all of the other Hermetic principles, you will find examples of how it plays itself out in all areas of life that come into contact with it. The Hermetic Principle of Rhythm says that everything has a flow, and that flow always includes a swing from one extreme to the other. Hot and cold, light and dark, joy and sadness, strength and weakness, belief and doubt. The swing happens in both directions. And while the movement itself might seem random at first, it actually follows a kind of inner logic. The further something swings in one direction, the further it tends to swing in the other. This is sometimes called compensation. It's the same principle we can observe in nature, in economies, in history, in weather patterns, in political climates. Everything that rises will one day fall. Everything that contracts will expand, and then contract again. To have this perspective is also a remedy for identification. How? If you know that the rise and fall of, for example, political ideologies and people's adherence to them follow a pattern determined by a natural law, it's much easier not to get swept up by the movements. It's much easier not to make them personal, and instead watch them from a distance while you focus on the higher order of things. What matters for us most, though, is how this plays out inside. The teachings don't just describe how the world works, they point us to the places where we tend to suffer and show us why we often feel stuck. Rhythm is one of those places. Because, as we've just seen an example of in the outer, if we don't see it, we get pulled by it. Our energy crashes, and we assume we've failed. Our confidence disappears, and we think something's wrong with us. We fall back into old habits and imagine that we've lost all progress. But in most cases, we haven't. We're just being swung back. The problem is not the swing itself. Just like in our dealings with the phenomena of the external reality, the problem is the identification with the swing. When you're caught up in a rhythm, without knowing it's a rhythm, it feels like reality. It feels like a mood is who you are. Like a setback is permanent. Like the energy will never return. But the swing always returns. And the fact that we don't always see that is part of the trap. It's the same swing, but with different clothes on. One week it's frustration, next week it's apathy. 1 month you're hyper-focused, the next you can't find motivation. That's rhythm. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, it means you're alive. And with this knowledge in the back of your mind, you can learn to work with the rhythm instead of struggling against it. You don't have to be dragged by the swing. That's not what this principle is teaching. It's not fatalistic. It's not saying that we have no agency or that we're just leaves on the wind. What it says is that rhythm operates whether we see it or not. But if we do see it, something changes. You stop being the pendulum and start being the one who notices the pendulum. You stop reacting and start observing. That doesn't sound like much, but it shifts everything. Because the moment you begin to observe without identifying, you begin to step above the swing. The Hermetic texts call this process neutralization. It's not about stopping the rhythm, but about rising to a place where its effects don't dominate your inner state. This means that you recognize a mood without becoming the mood. You acknowledge the loss of momentum without creating a story about failure. You feel the emotional low, but you don't let it define what's possible for you. There's a kind of steadiness that emerges, not because you're forcing anything, but because you're not being taken by surprise. You know the swing is part of the deal. Can you see how we are coming back to de-identification? How, in a sense, you are learning to live in the world while not being of it, because you are training yourself to see the currents of life from a higher vantage point where you don't have to get swept up by them. What often happens when people don't understand this principle is that they give up when things swing back. They begin a new habit, and it feels good for a while. Then the rhythm pulls the other way, and suddenly it's hard again. That's the natural swing. But the mind interprets it as defeat. It says this is not working, or I can't do this, or I've lost my motivation. But motivation is not meant to be constant. Neither is focus or creativity or clarity. These things come and go. They follow rhythm. And so the skill is not in making those states permanent. The skill is in how you relate to the temporary absence of them. Neutralization is the name for that shift. You rise just enough in awareness to notice the movement without being swept up in it. You hold a stillness while things swing around you, and from that place, your reactions become slower, softer, less automatic. You stop spiraling down just because the energy has shifted. You stop needing to chase every high. You find steadiness in the movement itself. And, according to the first principle of mentalism, behind all this movement is the one mind. And when you can be completely still and non-reactive to the events that unfold in your life, this one mind can move through you. In this state, your actions become effortless and proactive rather than forceful and reactive. These are two very different states to operate from. And once you've touched the higher state, even if it's just briefly, you will know for sure that there is much more to life than the vast majority of humanity realizes. Neutralization is not apathy. It's not dissociation. It's not pretending that things don't matter. It's a conscious choice to hold a center point, even when the energy around you swings from one side to the other. It's like having an anchor that isn't affected by the tides. And it's not something that requires extreme discipline or suppression. What it requires is presence. When you are present with what is happening, and you don't fight the swing, but you also don't identify with it, you begin to move differently. You stop trying to control the rhythm, and instead learn how to stabilize yourself within it. This is why so many spiritual and psychological practices talk about witnessing. Because the act of witnessing is one of the few things that is not part of the rhythm. The witness doesn't swing. The thoughts swing. The moods swing. The energy swings. But awareness itself remains. When you place your attention in that awareness, you are not denying the swing. You're not pushing it away. You're simply not obeying it. This is what the Hermetic teachings describe as rising to a higher plane, a place where things still happen, but they don't control you. And this is, again, where you can come into contact with the one unchangeable mind inside which all this movement is taking place. This principle also applies to the way we view progress. Sometimes we think progress means constant forward motion, but that's not how rhythm works. Progress often looks like movement forward, then backward, then forward again, but with a deeper understanding each time. You may revisit the same emotions, but with less attachment. You may fall into the same patterns, but you recover more quickly. That's rhythm too. It doesn't always look linear, but it moves. And if you work with it instead of against it, it builds something steady inside you. A kind of quiet strength. Knowing this, it's easier not to get swept up by the mind's stories about failure when the pendulum inevitably swings back. And when you're attuned to this principle, you don't have to struggle to force that which the time has not yet come for. You always have the option of looking at whatever is unfolding as the natural product of the mechanics of the universe, adjusting yourself accordingly and taking appropriate, aligned action. You don't have to fix the rhythm. You don't have to fight it. What matters is how you meet it. When the energy is high, you use it. You create, you connect, you expand. When the energy is low, you rest, reflect, restore. You don't panic when things slow down. You don't make permanent decisions in temporary states. You know the rhythm is in motion, and you move with it consciously. That's what rhythm offers us. Not control over the swing, but awareness of it. And, as we have seen, with awareness comes choice. There's another layer to this that we talked about in the beginning, and which you have probably discerned from the discussion, namely that rhythm is tied to polarity. The two principles work together. Everything has poles, light and dark, love and fear, motion and stillness. Rhythm is the motion between these poles. And the measure of swing in one direction always matches the swing in the opposite. So if you're experiencing an intense inner contraction, it usually means there is an expansion on the other side of it. But most people give up in the contraction. They see it as failure or punishment, not realizing that the rhythm is balancing itself. If you can stay centered through that swing, the return swing doesn't just bring you back to baseline, it often carries you further than you were before. That's the hidden gift of rhythm. When you don't fight it and you don't cling to it, it starts to serve you. You can surf it instead of being thrown by it, which is how it was meant to be used. The laws of the universe are meant to be understood and used, not battled against. You can use the swing back as a moment to rest and gather energy for the next movement forward. This is what people who train themselves in awareness begin to discover. They don't just become calmer, they become more effective. Because they know when to push and when to pause. They know that sometimes the most powerful move is to wait. Not out of laziness, but out of alignment with rhythm. The challenge, of course, is remembering all this when you're in the middle of a downward swing, when things feel stuck, when nothing is clear, when emotions are heavy. It's hard to remember then that this too is part of the rhythm. And yet that is when it matters the most. That's when the practice becomes real. Not when things are easy, but when they're not. If you can remember the principle of rhythm in those moments, you will not stay there as long. You won't create more downward motion through resistance or self-blame. You'll meet the low point with softness, knowing it is already in motion. There is an important point here that is worth emphasizing, namely how easy it is to forget all about these principles and how they manifest as soon as a trigger shows up. When things are dragging, the mind's tendency to make what is happening wrong and to start telling stories about how things are always going to be this way is strong. And this matters because when you get swept up in these lower states, you may either make things worse by struggling against life or hold on to the inertia by feeding it with negativity. Instead, take a step back. Realize that everything breathes, not just lungs and wind and waves. Life itself breathes. Consciousness breathes. Growth breathes. And when we forget this, we fight the exhale. We panic during the contraction. But no wave stays up forever, and no night stays dark. So the more you understand rhythm, not intellectually but through attention, the more you begin to trust your own timing. Not every day is a day for action. Not every moment is a time to decide. But every state, even the difficult ones, holds information. And rhythm is what carries that information forward. If you stop fighting it, it begins to teach you. So the next time you feel yourself losing momentum, don't rush to fix it. Don't assume you've failed. Ask instead, what part of the swing is this? Is this an inhale or an exhale? Am I being called inward, or am I just in a valley before the next peak? And can I hold myself here without collapsing into fear? That's where rhythm becomes your ally. Not because it disappears, but because it becomes familiar. In summary, the principle of rhythm teaches us that everything moves in cycles: thoughts, emotions, energy, growth, even our sense of self. This movement is not random, but follows a natural swing between poles, and the depth of the swing in one direction will always match the swing in the other. When we're unaware of this, we get caught up in the movement and mistake the swing for truth. But when we begin to observe rhythm rather than identify with it, we step into a new kind of freedom. This is what the Hermetic teachings call neutralization. Not escaping life's rhythms, but holding presence within them. It allows us to respond rather than react, to pause rather than push, and to trust the timing of things even when they seem to slow down or fall apart. By learning to move with rhythm instead of resisting it, we become steadier, clearer, and more aligned with how life actually works. And from that place, we begin to act from awareness rather than from impulse. We begin to live with rhythm rather than against it. Finally, you are reminded that rhythm is a law just as precise as gravity, albeit less easily observed. As such, it is impersonal. It does not play favorites. This is important to remember because when we identify with whatever is taking place in our lives, we tend to make it personal. What is simply the result of the pendulum swinging in the opposite direction is interpreted by the mind as a personal failure, a punishment, or a cosmic insult. But rhythm has no agenda. It doesn't punish or reward. It moves. And it is in that movement that all experiences arise, unfold, and pass. If we stop interpreting these movements as attacks or reflections of our worth and start seeing them as the laws of reality in action, we take the first step toward freedom. To understand this deeply is to stop taking life so personally. That doesn't mean becoming indifferent or emotionally numb. It means realizing that much of what we suffer over isn't about us at all. It's about misreading a natural law. We forget that the universe is patterned, that it breathes, that it is held together by currents more ancient and precise than anything the ego can imagine. And so we stop fighting life and begin learning from it. Instead of assuming that the challenges, the slowdowns, the setbacks, and even the inner storms are signs of failure, we begin to treat them as messages. Not messages about our worth, but messages about timing, alignment, and balance. Here, we can begin to act from a higher place, a place that sees the larger arc of things, a place that understands that every movement is part of a greater unfolding. Once you've stopped identifying with every swing of the pendulum, you can begin to operate not from the ego reacting to appearances, but from the one mind itself moving through you. You are moving from alignment and not from survival or fear. You're not trying to force the swing. You're simply aware of where it is and where you are in relation to it. Here, there's no excess effort, no frantic pushing, no grasping for certainty. You act when it's time to act. You wait when it's time to wait. You allow the universe to move through you rather than believing it's something you have to conquer. And this shift from trying to manage life to allowing consciousness to express itself through you is the difference between being trapped in the swing and walking freely above it. In that space, your relationship to life begins to soften. You no longer need things to be constant to feel safe. You stop demanding. You don't lose your footing when things change, because you know they will. Rhythm, just like any other phenomenon that is part of the human experience, becomes a teacher instead of a tormentor. Polarity becomes a guide instead of a threat. And the mind, when quieted, reveals itself not as the originator of thought, but as a reflection of something far deeper. No one escapes rhythm, but you can learn how to move with it. You can learn to observe the swing instead of becoming the swing. You can begin to find the place inside you that doesn't rise and fall, that doesn't contract and expand, that simply sees and allows. And in that seeing and allowing, there's a calm, a groundedness, a sense that while everything else may move, there is something in you that remains. Life no longer feels like something that happens to you. It becomes something you're in rhythm with, something you're in relationship with. And from that relationship, the one mind begins to move through you. And in that movement, there is lightness, effortlessness, clarity, and peace. You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.